My husband received a promotion and began working late hours. I then discovered a $5,000 jewelry receipt, found photos of him with another woman, and learned he had allowed her to pick up our children from school without informing me. I used to believe that happiness left footprints, little traces you could follow back to pinpoint exactly when everything changed. But that's not how my story goes. Instead, it dissolved like sugar in hot coffee, so gradually that I didn't notice until the sweetness was gone. Let me take you back to when I thought I had it all. I'm Sarah, 34, and until 6 months ago, I was living what I considered the American Dream 2.0, successful career, picture-perfect colonial house in the suburbs with a maple tree out front, and a marriage that made our friends joke about couple goals. My husband, Mark, 35, was everything the romance novels promise but rarely deliver. Charismatic, ambitious, and seemingly devoted to our family. We met at a housewarming party 10 years ago. You know those moments when the universe seems to orchestrate everything perfectly? The mutual friend who insisted I come despite my protests about being too tired. The way Mark's laugh carried across the room before I even saw his face, how he later admitted he'd positioned himself near the cheese plate, hoping I'd come back for seconds. It felt like fate, though now I wonder if I was just reading the wrong story all along. Our courtship was a masterclass in thoughtfulness. He remembered how I mentioned hating public proposals in passing, so when he asked me to marry him, it was just us two in our tiny apartment, pasta sauce simmering on the stove. I thought I'd found someone who truly saw me. The wedding was intimate, fairy lights and mason jars, wildflower centerpieces, and promises we made under an arch my father built. The early years were golden. We moved in sync, building our dreams brick by brick. The colonial house with its creaky third stair, the garden I planted imagining future children playing there, the way Mark would bring me coffee in bed every Sunday morning without fail. Emma arrived first, all wide eyes and curious fingers, and Mark surprised everyone by being the kind of father who didn't just help, but thrived in his role. I still have videos of him doing midnight feeding, singing off-key lullabies while wearing a baby carrier around the house. 3 years later, Lucas completed our family, and we fell into the kind of comfortable rhythm that makes you believe you've figured it all out. We both had careers we loved, me in marketing, him in corporate sales, but Mark's star really began to rise about 5 years in. With each promotion, each success, I felt proud watching him climb higher. We were comfortable, not just financially, but emotionally. We could afford family vacations to Disney World and starting college funds for the kids, but more importantly, we could still make each other laugh over inside jokes at dinner. Then came the regional director promotion 8 months ago. It seemed like another step up, another reason to celebrate, but sometimes the things that look like blessings are actually fault lines spreading spiderweb cracks through everything you thought was solid. Looking back now, I realized there were signs, tiny moments that seemed insignificant then, but now flash in my memory like warning lights. The first time he missed family dinner without calling, how his phone started turning face down on the table, the way his hugs became shorter, more distracted. But hindsight is a cruel teacher, and I was about to learn its hardest lessons. Success has a funny way of changing things. When Mark got his promotion to regional director, we toasted with champagne, dreaming of family vacations to Europe, and maybe finally getting that pool the kids had been begging for. The raise was substantial, the kind that makes you feel like all those years of hard work are finally paying off. And I remember thinking, this is it. We're really living the dream now. But dreams, I would learn, have a way of shape-shifting when you're not looking. The changes crept in like evening shadows, barely noticeable at first. A missed dinner here, a late meeting there. His texts were apologetic. Sorry, honey, client emergency, or big presentation tomorrow, don't wait up. I'd keep his dinner warm anyway, telling the kids, Daddy's working hard to take care of us. Emma would nod solemnly while Lucas would push his peas around his plate, asking when Daddy would read him his bedtime story again. I became a master of compensation, filling the growing spaces he left behind. I'd help Emma with her math homework, something Mark used to do. I'd make sound effects during Lucas's bedtime stories, though they were never quite as good as Mark's. I handled the parent-teacher conferences solo, signed permission slips, coordinated play dates, and managed the endless logistics of running a household, all while telling myself this was temporary, just an adjustment period. But temporary started feeling awfully permanent. The missed dinners evolved into missed weekends. His texts grew shorter, colder, clinical dispatches from a man I was starting to struggle to recognize. Working late, at the gym, don't wait up, 3 words or less, like he was rationing his communication with us. Then came the cologne, a scent I didn't recognize. When I mentioned it, he said he'd borrowed it from a colleague after a gym session. A reasonable explanation, perhaps, but something in his voice hit a wrong note, like a piano key, slightly out of tune. When I tried to discuss these changes, his responses turned sharp-edged and defensive. "You're being selfish," he'd say, his voice taking on that new, hard quality I was growing to dread. "This promotion benefits all of us. I thought you'd be supportive." The word supportive became a weapon aimed precisely at my doubts and concerns. The financial discrepancies felt like the first concrete proof that something was truly wrong. Mark and I had always been meticulous with money. Joint account for family expenses, separate accounts for personal spending. It was a system built on trust and transparency, one that had served us well for a decade. But now there were unexplained transfers, thousands of dollars vanishing into an unknown account. When confronted, Mark had an answer ready, almost too ready. "Business expenses," he said, not meeting my eyes. You know how it is with client entertainment. The reimbursement process takes time." He delivered the explanation with the smooth confidence of a practiced performance, each word carefully chosen and rehearsed. I might have swallowed that explanation if it weren't for the receipt I found in his pocket that Sunday afternoon. The laundry basket was balanced on my hip when I felt the paper crinkle in his pants pocket. $5,000 for a bracelet from Winston's on 5th. My heart stopped, then started again with a painful thud. My birthday was months past. Our anniversary was half a year away. The kids were too young for jewelry. That receipt felt like a key unlocking a door I hadn't even known existed, one that led to questions I wasn't sure I was ready to ask. Standing there in our sun-filled laundry room, holding that slip of paper, I felt the foundation of my marriage shift beneath my feet like sand in an hourglass, grain by grain, moment by moment, truth by truth. They say confrontation reveals character. When I showed Mark the jewelry receipt, his reaction told me everything I needed to know, just not in the way I expected. His face transformed from confusion to anger in seconds, like a match being struck. "You're spying on me now?" he snarled, his voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. "I can't spend my own money without you policing me?" The man who once discussed every major purchase with me was now treating our joint finances like his personal slush fund. He stormed out that night, claiming he needed space at a friend's house. The door slammed with such force that Lucas started crying upstairs. As I comforted our son, I realized something had to give. If Mark wouldn't provide answers, I'd find them myself. Technology has a way of preserving truths we'd rather forget. While Mark had fortified his devices with new passwords, a digital wall between us, he'd overlooked our shared cloud storage. It was there, among countless family photos of birthday parties and soccer games, that I found them, pictures that felt like bullets to the heart. A woman I'd never met, beautiful in that effortless way that makes you instantly self-conscious, appearing in photo after photo with my husband. They were at restaurants I'd never been to, hotels I'd never seen. In one photo, she wore a red dress at what looked like a corporate gala, her hand resting possessively on Mark's arm. In another, they were casual at a sidewalk cafe, sharing a moment that looked deeply intimate. Their body language spoke volumes, the kind of comfortable closeness that takes months, if not years, to develop. Each swipe through the photos felt like watching a parallel life unfold, one where I didn't exist. When Mark announced he needed to go to Europe for 2 weeks on short notice, alarm bells rang. In 10 years of corporate life, I'd never known his company to arrange international travel without extensive planning, but he was already packed and gone before I could voice my suspicions. Those 2 weeks of his absence became my investigation period. What I uncovered made me wish I could go back to not knowing. The Europe trip? Partially true. He did have business meetings, but expense reports showed he'd extended his stay by a week. And he wasn't alone. Sarah, I finally had a name for her, had joined him. First-class flights, luxury hotels, romantic restaurants, all charged to our joint account like some sort of twisted vacation package. The apartment lease was perhaps the most calculated discovery. 3 months after his promotion, he'd started paying for a one-bedroom in the city, not some crash pad for late nights at the office. This was a luxury building with a doorman and a rooftop pool. The monthly rent was more than our first mortgage payment. I created spreadsheets documenting everything: dates, amounts, locations. The pattern was clear as day. Every late meeting and business dinner perfectly aligned with charges at intimate restaurants and hotel bars. The amounts were staggering. This wasn't just an affair, it was a whole secret life being bankrolled by our family's resources. But the true gut punch came from our daughter's innocent comment over dinner. "Daddy's friend Sarah makes the best chocolate chip cookies," Emma said casually, pushing her peas around her plate. "She got them from the bakery when she picked me up from school last week when you were in your meeting." The fork slipped from my hand, clattering against the plate. My children had met this woman. She had been alone with them. A quick call to the school confirmed my worst fears. Mark had added her to the approved pickup list months ago as a family friend. The thought of this stranger, this woman who was systematically destroying my family, having access to my children, made bile rise in my throat. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I sat in our home office surrounded by bank statements, photos, and school forms. The evidence of betrayal was overwhelming, not just of our marriage, but of our entire family's trust and security. I needed more than just answers now. I needed a plan, and I needed professional help to make it. Little did I know this was just the beginning of what I would uncover. My lawyer's office was on the 15th floor of a downtown building, all glass and steel and uncomfortable truths. "Document everything," she said, her voice steady and professional, "but maintain normalcy. The moment he suspects you know, everything changes." I remember nodding, wondering how I'd become someone who needed to gather evidence against their own husband. For 6 weeks, I lived in a performance worthy of an Oscar. I made his favorite meals, asked about his day, and kissed him goodbye each morning, all while meticulously tracking his betrayal. Every receipt, every bank statement, every suspicious transaction became another piece in a puzzle I never wanted to complete. It was like watching a magic trick in reverse, seeing how the illusion was constructed, one deception at a time. The financial trail told its own story. He hadn't just been moving money from our joint accounts. He'd been systematically dismantling our future. Withdrawals from investment accounts we'd built together, retirement funds we'd planned to use for traveling in our golden years, college savings we'd carefully cultivated for Emma and Lucas. Each transaction was another brick in a wall between our shared past and his planned future without us. The toll of living this double life manifested physically. Food lost its taste, sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, my nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering how many lies were sleeping beside me. I dropped 15 pounds in those 6 weeks, my clothes hanging loose like borrowed items. My closest friend Jenny noticed during our weekly coffee meetup. "Are you okay?" she asked, concern etching her features. I fed her some story about work stress, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. Then came that Tuesday evening. Mark walked through the door at 6:30, unusually early for him these days. Something in his demeanor, of forced casualness perhaps, told me this was it. He'd chosen our kitchen table for his grand announcement, the same table where we'd helped Emma with her science projects, where Lucas had learned to write his name, where countless family dinners had created a decade of memories. "We need to talk," he said, those 4 words that never precede anything good. I sat there, watching him perform his carefully rehearsed speech about growing apart and needing space. He'd already found an apartment, he explained, his voice carrying a practiced gentleness that made my skin crawl. How considerate of him to have everything arranged for his new life. When he finished, I reached for my own prop in this twisted play, a manila folder I'd prepared weeks ago. I placed it between us, its contents representing hundreds of hours of investigation, countless sleepless nights, and the death of every trust I'd ever placed in him. His face, as he realized what he was looking at, drained of color so quickly I thought he might faint. That's when the floodgates opened. Sarah wasn't just a colleague, she was his soulmate, he claimed, someone he'd met at last year's sales conference in Phoenix. The apartment wasn't new. It had been their secret meeting place for months, their private sanctuary paid for with our family's money. The mysterious transfers weren't for business. They were his escape fund, carefully accumulated for his new life with her. He spoke with the desperate energy of someone finally unburdening themselves, each confession tumbling out faster than the last. It had started as friendship, he insisted. They'd connected over late-night conversations about sales strategies and corporate politics. One dinner led to another, one touch led to more. He tried to fight it, he claimed, his voice taking on a pleading quality that might have moved me 6 weeks ago. Then came the most audacious lie of all, that our marriage had been struggling for years. This from the man who'd written me a love letter on our 10th anniversary just months ago, who'd planned a surprise party for my birthday, who'd been shopping for a family vacation home only last summer. His attempts to rewrite our history felt like the final betrayal, a desperate effort to justify the unjustifiable. I sat there listening to him destroy 10 years of memories with his revisionist history and felt something unexpected. Pity. Not for myself, but for him. This man so desperate to justify his actions that he'd convince himself of anything, even the destruction of a happy marriage. Some moments burn themselves into your memory with perfect clarity. The soft whisper of divorce papers sliding across our kitchen table, the way Mark's face cycled through emotions like a slot machine, shock, anger, resignation, the hollow sound of our front door closing behind him. That was 3 days ago, and the echo still hasn't faded. The house feels different now, too big, too quiet, too full of memories. Emma and Lucas are staying with my sister Rachel this weekend. Just until you get your bearings, she said, hugging me tightly. But how do you find your bearings when your entire world has shifted on its axis? My lawyer, Catherine, assures me we're in a strong position. The financial evidence alone, she says, her voice carrying that confident edge I'm paying her considerable hourly rates for, gives us significant leverage. But legal victories feel hollow when I think about explaining to my children why their father won't be coming home. The practical side of divorce, it turns out, is a full-time job in itself. I've become something of a digital fortress builder these past few days. Every financial record, text message, and damning photo has been backed up in triplicate. Cloud storage, USB drives stashed at Rachel's house, hard copies filed with Catherine, 18 months of bank statements, credit card bills, and investment records spread across my dining room table like a paper trail of betrayal. That $5,000 jewelry receipt and the apartment lease agreement, the smoking guns in this mystery I never wanted to solve, are safely preserved in multiple locations. Catherine's voice rings in my ears. Document everything, Sarah. Every conversation, every interaction, every new development. So I've become a chronicler of my own tragedy, keeping detailed notes of every exchange, every missed pickup time, every questionable financial movement. The school situation has become its own complex chess game. For now, we're keeping Emma and Lucas at their current school, where the staff has been incredibly supportive. The administration knows our situation, their teachers are on alert, and the guidance counselor, Mrs. Martinez, has been checking in with them daily. The first order of business was revoking Sarah's pickup authorization. The thought of her having access to my children still makes my stomach turn. But their school's proximity to Mark's new place, his not-so-new apartment, as it turns out, means changes may be coming. I've been researching schools in my area, focusing on those with strong counseling programs. The kids will need support navigating this new reality we've been thrust into. The financial fortification has been exhaustive. Joint credit cards, frozen. New personal account, opened at a different bank entirely, one where Mark has never set foot. Every password in our digital life has been changed. Email accounts, social media profiles, banking logins, phone passwords. I've even set up credit monitoring to catch any attempts at opening new accounts. The spreadsheet I've created tracking our assets and debts would make an accountant proud. Some nights after I've triple-checked everything, I sit in my living room and try to imagine what normal will look like now. The family photos on the walls feel like artifacts from a different timeline. Should I take them down? Leave them up for the kids? These are the questions that keep me awake at 3 a.m., along with the bigger ones that have no easy answers. How do I tell my children their father chose another life over ours? How long before Emma stops asking when Daddy's coming home? Will Lucas remember a time when our family was whole? When does surviving become living again? I know there are others who have walked this path before me. I see their stories of survival, of rebuilding, of finding happiness again. Right now, those stories feel like fairy tales, beautiful but distant, belonging to someone else's reality. But maybe that's how all healing starts. One day at a time, one foot in front of the other, until you look back and realize you've walked further than you thought possible. For now, I focus on what I can control, protecting my children, securing our future, documenting everything. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, but tonight, I am safe. My children are safe. And somewhere in the rubble of what was, I'll find the foundation for what will be. You never really think about home security until you need it. Now I find myself checking the cameras multiple times a day. One by the front door, one covering the backyard, two more monitoring the perimeter. Paranoid? Maybe. But watching those little green lights blink gives me a sense of control I desperately need right now. The new locks and security codes are just another layer of protection between us and uncertainty. The temporary custody arrangement feels like a tightrope walk. Mark gets every other weekend, supervised, a stipulation that made him furious but non-negotiable given recent events. He has to give 24 hours notice before contacting the kids, which he calls excessive, but my lawyer calls prudent. Each visit, each phone call, each interaction goes into my growing documentation log, a chronicle of our new normal. 3 weeks have passed since everything exploded, and the divorce proceedings have revealed uglier truths than I imagined possible. Mark's initial demand for 50% custody would have been laughable if it wasn't so infuriating. This from a man who missed Emma's piano recital because he was having dinner with Sarah, who couldn't attend Lucas's t-ball games because he was working late, all meticulously documented in my records. When my lawyer presented the evidence, a calendar of missed events, documentation of the unauthorized school pickup situation with Sarah, text messages showing canceled plans with the kids, Mark's bravado crumbled. His lawyer, a sharp-suited man with tired eyes, quickly pivoted to suggesting a more realistic arrangement. I recognized that look of resignation. It's the same one I wore for months. The financial discoveries keep coming like aftershocks following an earthquake. Mark hadn't just been siphoning money from our joint accounts and investment portfolios. He'd been raiding our children's future. The college funds we'd been building since their births, the savings bonds from grandparents, all systematically depleted. In mediation, when confronted with the evidence, he claimed he was protecting the money. From what? From whom? From their mother, who hadn't touched a penny of it in 8 years. Even the mediator, a woman who probably prides herself on her poker face, couldn't hide her skepticism. Mark's lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his chair, probably calculating how to spin this to the judge. Then came the credit cards. Multiple accounts opened in his name, carrying balances that made my head spin. Restaurant bills, hotel charges, jewelry store purchases, the paper trail of his double life. But it's the children who bear the heaviest burden of his choices. Emma and Lucas see Dr. Patterson, a child therapist who specializes in divorce cases, every Wednesday afternoon. Her office is filled with stuffed animals and art supplies, a safe space where they can try to make sense of their shattered world. Emma, at 8, carries an anger that breaks my heart. She's old enough to piece things together, to understand that Daddy chose someone else over us. Last week, when Mark came to take her to dinner, she locked herself in her room. "I hate him," she screamed, words no mother ever wants to hear about their child's father. Later that night, I found her clutching her old teddy bear, the one Mark bought her when she was born, trying to muffle her sobs. Lucas, at 5, lives in a state of perpetual confusion. Every night at bedtime, he asks when Daddy's coming home, and every night I struggle to find the right words. Daddy lives in a different house now, I tell him. But how do you explain to a 5-year-old that sometimes love isn't forever? Dr. Patterson says their reactions are normal, that anger and confusion are natural responses to trauma. She tells me to be patient, to maintain routines, to let them feel whatever they need to feel. Some days those feel like the hardest tasks in the world. But then I look at my children, Emma helping Lucas with his shoelaces, Lucas making his sister laugh with silly faces, and I know we'll find our way through this. We have to. The legal bills keep mounting, but I've started a separate account for them, adding whatever I can spare each week. It feels like paying for a ticket to a show you never wanted to see, but here we are, front row seats to the dismantling of our family. Yet somehow, in the midst of all this chaos, we're finding our rhythm. Different, broken, but ours. The rhythmic ticking of the clock in my therapist's office has become oddly comforting. These are natural responses, she says, her voice gentle but firm. Trauma doesn't follow a timeline. I nod, remembering how I used to think healing would be linear. Meanwhile, Mark's desperate attempts to salvage his reputation have turned into something almost theatrical. He's crafting elaborate narratives about our supposedly failing marriage, telling anyone who'll listen that he was some sort of martyr, staying for the kids. The irony is palpable. Our friends were there for our anniversary celebration just last year, saw the genuine happiness in our vacation photos, witnessed our easy laughter at dinner parties. Now they forward me his frantic messages seeking allies, shaking their heads at his transparent attempts at reputation management. Then came Sarah's revelation, a plot twist I hadn't seen coming. Her voice trembled over the phone as she unraveled Mark's web of lies. He told me you'd been separated for over a year, she confessed, horror creeping into her voice. I had no idea you were still living together. The moment she learned the truth, she ended it. Now Mark's rage has two targets. As if we're conspirators in exposing his deception rather than its victims, Sarah's offered to provide a formal statement to my lawyer detailing the timeline of their relationship and his elaborate deceptions. My healing journey has become a daily meditation. Between therapy sessions, I've reclaimed my spot on the yoga mat, finding strength in the familiar poses. The kids and I are building new traditions, Friday movie nights, Sunday morning pancake experiments. There's a strange beauty in reconstruction. The practical side of life demands attention too. I'm transitioning back to full-time work, something I stepped away from when Lucas was born. The lawyer's fees make my stomach clench every time I see the numbers. But, as my sister reminds me, you can't put a price on peace of mind. Mark oscillates between extremes like a pendulum gone haywire. One day he's sending tearful texts about reconciliation, especially since Sarah left. The next, he's firing off angry threats that my lawyer documents meticulously. We now communicate through carefully worded emails or in the presence of witnesses, a strange choreography of formal interactions where love once lived. To all those who've been reaching out, thank you for your patience. Life has been a whirlwind of court proceedings, work transitions, and parenting through the storm. I finally have a moment to breathe and share this update, though the journey is far from over. Time has a way of shifting perspective. 8 months since my last words here, and I'm writing from a different place, literally and figuratively. The divorce was finalized last week, closing a chapter that spanned nearly a year of my life. The terms exceeded my expectations, though victory feels like a hollow word when describing the end of an 18-year marriage. The legal chess match reached its climax 6 months into proceedings when Mark made a desperate play for our house. Despite living alone in his apartment since Sarah's departure, he claimed our family home as his primary residence, pushing for a forced sale. Then came the theatrical twist. He convinced Sarah to appear as his character witness at mediation. His final gambit unraveled spectacularly when she chose truth over his promises of reconciliation, her testimony exposing the web of lies he'd woven under oath about their relationship's timeline. The mediator's report read like a carefully crafted indictment of Mark's character, documenting patterns of deception that extended beyond our marriage into his professional life. His company's HR department uncovered falsified expense reports, leading to a professional probation that seemed to mirror his personal one. The judge's ruling was decisive. I retained the house and primary custody, while Mark got his apartment, his car, and a visitation schedule that feels more like an obligation than a right. Justice, when it finally came, wore a practical face. Mark must repay every dollar he siphoned from our children's college funds, with interest compounding his betrayal. The financial settlement factored in his lavish spending on Sarah, and he's now responsible for child support and a portion of my legal fees. It's not revenge, it's restitution. The custody arrangement evolved out of necessity. After Mark attempted to introduce the kids to his new girlfriend, yes, another one, without consulting their therapist or me, all visits became supervised. It's a temporary measure subject to review in 6 months, but for now, it provides a structure that feels safe. The children's therapy sessions continue, their healing process unmarked by artificial deadlines. Life has a way of surprising you. I've discovered strength in unexpected places. In the quiet moments of running my new freelance marketing business from home, and reconnecting with friends who never really left, in the simple joy of making decisions without second-guessing myself. The thought of dating hovers on the horizon like a distant sunrise. Not yet, but someday. Final thoughts. To those navigating similar storms, document everything, trust your instincts, build your support system. The path through betrayal isn't linear, but it leads somewhere real. Sometimes the life you rebuild turns out to be stronger than the one that crumbled. In my case, it already has. P.S. The kids and I are planning our first solo vacation next month. It feels like planting a flag in new territory, scary and exciting all at once, but then again, that's what new beginnings are supposed to feel like.